Thank you for your welcome and understanding that you made a choice to come tonight instead of going to the hockey game. I think lifts the risk factor for us tonight. You know, one of the characteristics of living in a complex world is we are invited to make increasing numbers of choices. And as I have thought about that, particularly for the younger generation, if it was possible to give a gift to young people, and undoubtedly to those of us who are working our way through this world, the gift of the ability to make positive choices would be one of the special gifts I would like to put in a package and offer to people, because we have so many to make. And this stands in contrast with Canada's history, where we had a cultural consensus that was really shaped because of the historical and enduring influence of the Christian faith. We have been talking in previous nights about the contemporary Canadian context. We have looked at Canada as a multi-minded society, characterized not just by multiculturalism and multi-faith realities, but also multi-moral, multi-family structure, multi-gender roles, multi-career choices, characterized by diversity. Last night we sought to present a biblical perspective that can bring clarity in the midst of complexity. And in doing that, we look particularly at John chapter 8 and Jesus' encounter with the woman brought to him in a public forum accused of adultery, and particularly emphasized that in the midst of that very complex situation, Jesus responded with both compassion to protect the vulnerable person in the situation. He de-escalated, took the tension away from what was happening there, and he also moved with a balance in terms of conviction. And last evening, as Allison has already reminded us, to live as followers of Jesus in this modern world is to somehow balance conviction and compassion. They are the guardrails that keep us on the road and out of the ditches. They protect us. They flavor us. They inject attitudes into us as we look at diverse issues. It has long been rumored that we have passed through a stage where the death of God is a reality. What I hope that we understand about Canadian life is that we do not have evidence to mourn the death of God, but we do have a current situation where it is proper to lament the loss of God. And this becomes the focus for us this evening, to say in the contemporary context, where God is no longer center stage, where the assumptions of Christendom have eroded, how do we live in what we now call a pluralistic society? We would all understand that there are rituals in modern life for more occasions than just going to church. We frequently expect unstated ceremonial standards to set the behavioral rules and regulations for us. Whenever O Canada is sung, we stand with respect for the nation. At orchestra performances, whispering is disrespectful and coughing is uncouth. Clapping between movements is a sign of musical ignorance. The protocol at funerals demands that we relate to each other in hushed tones, and laughter is unacceptable. I know it's not a hockey image in keeping with this evening, But even at baseball games, particularly if you go to the Sky Dome where I live, where the world champions still reign, incidentally, the unofficial rules say, do not leave your seat to get a hot dog or for any other reason until the third batter is out and the players on the field are headed for the dugout. Our rituals, our codes of conduct, keep our behavior inside the limits of approved social etiquette. And as we reflect on our family lives, as we were growing up as children, our parents or guardians, the adults in our lives, were quick to teach us proper etiquette at the table. Keep your elbows off the table still rings in my ears. Don't talk with your mouth full. Don't interrupt when someone else is speaking. And so we have ways of passing along social etiquette that help us live with some rules and regulations, assumptions in our society. The premise of this evening is to suggest at this stage in Canada's history, our cultural etiquette for living in a pluralistic society is not as clearly defined as our other rituals and our other rules. The harsh reality is this is the first time we are working our way through this period of history. One of the difficulties with writing history for the first time is that you do not have practice. There is no rehearsal time. The first time into the disarray of diversity challenges us with newness, and for which we do not have markers to guide us into what is always appropriate behavior. We have already noted in this series that the disarray of diversity is disruptive for many of God's people. Some people long for what used to be. They are living with a sense of spiritual and, I dare say, cultural loss, somehow connected to the loss of God in Canadian society. But as we understand pluralism to simply be more than one, and to apply that to different belief options, which would say that pluralism endorses more than one belief ultimate, the caution tonight is that we do not become judgmental of diversity. In fact, the proposal is that we live with appreciation for diversity. For diversity is God's idea. Think about color in the world. The greens, the blues, the oranges, the turquoises. Think how boring the world would be if it was just one color, even if it was your favorite color. Think about music. What would a symphony orchestra be like if there was just a violin section? Or what would the symphony be like without a violin section? God is a God who has created a world marked by diversity. In the beginning, the rainbow marked the sign of God's presence, this multicolored expression of the reality of God. The world has been so given to creation that it encourages diversity. If you're wondering whether that is true or not, I would suggest you just look around at the people in this room. We are an expression of diversity. Every face unique. Every body with special identification, some of which we will not take note of. I just had a marvelous meal. And we have theological diversity. There is Calvinism, and there is Arminianism, and there is the Baptist collage. There are doctrinal distinctives. We have different views of the inspiration of Scripture. Different traditions express and respond to the sacraments in unique ways. I dare say there are even different modes of baptism, some appreciated more than others. There is ecclesiology and there is eschatology, inviting different perspectives from different minds and different faith traditions. There are worship styles that give to us different ways to express our love for God. There are denominational structures. Oh, how we love denominational structures. But different in different places and in different organizations. There are personality temperaments. They mark the diversity of God's creation. Diversity is God's idea. And if that is the case, we must learn to live peaceably and productively with the diversity that is swirling around us in this modern age. In the first part of this evening's address, I would like us to think about some terms and to see if we can clarify how we use words that we often hear. One of the terms frequently used as a label to describe modern life is that we are a secular nation, or we are somehow believers in the secularism sense. It's always healthy for us to distinguish between the process of becoming more and more secular, which is secularization, with the ideology of secularism. In very layman-type terms, secularism is simply a belief that invites people to create life without any need for God. In secularism, God is unnecessary. And what has been happening to us in the last 30 and 40 years in particular is that Canadians are becoming more and more secular. But because we have the retention of our religious roots, it is unfair to say that Canada is a secularist nation. More accurate, I would contend, to suggest that Canadians are semi-secularized. It is true that television is the predominant shaper and the delivery system of secularism. You see, it creates life without God. There is no need for God. Solutions to life and the experience of life is portrayed without acknowledgement of God. Research tells us that only 5% of characters in sitcoms and other major television programs have any religious identity. And so every day we see life without a need for God. And what is happening is that secularism is becoming the pervasive presence of unstated belief for Canadians. That is to say that Canadians don't think of themselves as being secular or believers in secularism. They still identify themselves as Christians. 3 out of 4, we have already observed, disagree with the statement, "I am not a Christian." But what we have had is a secular drift into an emerging cultural consensus, this pervasive presence of unstated belief that marks modern Canadian life. The analysis of secularism, that approach to life where God is unnecessary, drives the conclusion that secularism is an enemy of the faith. When we are invited to conceive life, live life, plan for life, without any place for God, it is legitimate to say that secularism is an enemy of the faith. Another very frequent label that is applied to contemporary culture is that we are also relativist, or that relativism, this belief that truth does not exist as an external reality, the idea that life is more subjective than objective, the concept that personal opinion is more potent and more appropriate for the age than looking to God or to other sources of objective reality. We know that truth becomes the substance from which we design morals and ethics and values. And we also know that increasingly Canadians are wanting to decide for themselves what is right and wrong. And over 70% are ready to say that all world religions are equally valid. We need to be careful how we critique relativism. Because in evangelical circles, we know that truth is central and key to our understanding of life and to the construction of our convictions. I would propose tonight, however, ladies and gentlemen, that we also need to be careful that we do not overclaim when it comes to positioning ourselves about truth. We do well to remember that we look through a glass darkly. And instead of believing that we can have the final word on all issues, on all circumstances, it is to remember that every time we pick up the text, we surrender our subjective interpretation to that text. And as accurate and pure as Baptist doctrine is, it also is a subjective perception of the revelation of God. You see, it is one perspective among many other Christian perspectives. I am not proposing that we become soft on our conviction that truth exists. I am proposing that we not be flippant about how easy it is to access the mind of God and become dogmatic on our truth convictions. The better balance is to be careful that we do not overclaim on the one hand or underclaim on the other. It is that we seek to be true to our light, but also true to our darkness. We know that God created the world. We don't know when or how God created the world. We know that Jesus is a historical figure. We know that the cross is central to the whole scheme of what Christianity is about. We have theories about the atonement. There is a sense of transcendence and majesty about many dimensions of the Christian faith that we in fact can only believe by faith. The existence of God Himself or herself is a postulate that we risk our lives on, but it is not something that we can prove in an objective sense. And so in this pluralistic age, marked by multi-mindedness, let us be true to the light, and let us be humble about the darkness. And as we pick up the text, may we be touched with the humble hermeneutic. But still, as we think about relativism, this realm that contrasts opinion with truth, because relativism asserts that truth does not exist and we cannot be certain about what is wrong and right and good and better and best. To construct life without the framework of truth invites us to also say that relativism is an enemy of the faith. It is not just a competitor, it is an opponent of the faith. It invites us to conceive life in ways that are not inherently Christian. Now, if we think about pluralism in comparison to relativism, it will be important for us to also establish that ideological pluralism is synonymous with relativism. That is, ideological pluralism lays hands on the conclusion that all views are equally valid. And in that sense, we would also say that ideological pluralism is an enemy of the faith because it takes away permission to assert that there is one view that can in fact be true. But where we live and move and have our being, in the normal flow of our days and nights, we more frequently encounter cultural pluralism. Cultural pluralism is simply based on the social assumption that we put in place social structures for cradling diversity. A definition that we need to think carefully about. That cultural pluralism, the way we set up life in Canadian society, the social framework within which we exchange life with people who believe different things, is based on this idea of creating social structures for cradling diversity. You see, what that does then, it allows us to coexist with people who have different points of view. What cultural pluralism does is to say to us that we can live alongside secularists, if you please, or relativists, or hedonists, or whatever other ist you would like to describe. And what I would propose tonight, and where we need to be careful to discuss with some clarity, is to suggest to us that although secularism is an enemy of the faith, as relativism is an enemy of the faith, ladies and gentlemen, cultural pluralism is a friend of the faith. If we are to reject cultural pluralism, that is, creating a society where differences can coexist, as members of a minority group in modern life, if we do not make cultural pluralism work and contribute to an enhanced pluralism, we will be pushed to the sidelines of society and we will watch life pass us by. Because the dominant mood of the culture, although we are retaining religiosity, the unstated presence of cultural consensus is a combination of secular pluralism. It is people who are constructing their lives without a sense of need for God to make it through the events of a day. And it is people who endorse multi-mindedness as an assumption of contemporary life. So cultural pluralism. This multi-minded, multi-moral, multi-ethnic, multi-faith, I dare say multi-family structure. Cultural pluralism marked by multi-mindedness is a friend of the faith. And it's a friend because, as God's people, we can carve out a place in pluralism and be one voice among other voices. One point of view among other points of view. It gives us the prerogative to coexist with people who are different from us. One of the reasons that cultural pluralism is a friend is that when we have permission to coexist, that is to be part of what is cradled in our social structures, it is to realize that pluralism is also an open system. You know, it's a way of living that doesn't have its mind all made up about everything. You see, cultural pluralism is subject to influence. And if we can be a clear voice, if we can somehow be in the social structures and be in relationships with both conviction and compassion, we will be able to make a case for the faith. And it is only by embracing the assumptions of cultural pluralism, however, that we will have a place to stand in the culture. Distinct from ideological pluralism, which is synonymous with relativism, and cultural pluralism, it is important for us to also acknowledge that in Canadian life we have increasing levels of religious pluralism. You know, today's world is like a giant kettle drum. When you hit it in one place, it reverberates all around the world. Part of the reality of modern life is the movement of people. We've already noted that 1 million Canadians identify themselves with other world religions. Immigration has always been a source of religious diversification for us. We started with Catholics and Protestants. Immigration has brought to us increasing flavors of faiths. Religious pluralism, in a sense, is faith multiplied. And our multi-faith society generates religious pluralism. And we now know, of course, that it is multiplying inside our national borders. What we understand about creation as God's people is that God created the whole world. And we would also contend that all truth is God's truth. Now, if we accept the idea that all truth is God's truth, we will realize that truth can be accessed from more than just the Bible or other Christian teaching. There is scientific truth. There is truth out of the arts. There is truth out of the humanities. Some people even think that sociology can be used to discern a little bit of truth. You see, Christianity is not the only source of truth, because God is as big as creation. And out of the whole revelation, when we find truth, we know the source. This gives us permission and incentive to look at other world religions to see what is truthful about other world religions. It invites us to inquire and understand what they believe and how they give to their own adherents a sense of meaning and direction in life. But we must also assert this evening that although we can celebrate what we share in common with other world religions, we must also be discriminating in how we understand other world religions. You know, making the theological declarations that all religions are the same is an irrational declaration. Rather, Pope John Paul, in his recent book, gives us a framework for how to respond and see other world faiths. Pope John Paul asserts, "The Catholic Church rejects nothing that is true and holy in these religions. The Church has a high regard for their conduct and way of life, for those precepts and doctrines which, although differing on many points from that which the Church believes and propounds, often reflect a ray of truth which enlightens all men. However, the Church proclaims and is bound to proclaim that Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, in whom men must find the fullness of religious life, and in whom God has reconciled everything to himself." And so, as we see this expression of religious pluralism adding to the swirl of modern life, it is an invitation to discern that which is true, but also to discriminate in response to that which is outside the circle of truth. Last evening, I proposed to us that we can look at how different people respond to diversity. I would suggest that on the question of world religions, other world faiths, that reclaimers are activated by the conviction that their way is the only true way to understand life. Christian reclaimers commit themselves to convert members of other world religions to their particular view of faith. They readily pray and give financial support to the efforts of missionaries sent to foreign lands. Tribalizers live with a readiness to control their environment and, if necessary, confront life around them. Tribalizers are often blinded by what is sacred and important to others. They can be counted on to vote against turbans on the heads of RCMP officers and to deny access to Canadian Legion halls when the rules say no headgear is allowed, even though the headgear is a religious symbol treasured by another world faith. Accommodators, on the other hand, are motivated by compassion and concerned about not offending or judging anyone. Accommodators roll out the welcome mat to people, especially if it is rumored that they are subject to discrimination. Accommodators embrace the premise that all religions are equally valid. They can be counted on to downplay and contend that there is very little danger in syncretism. Cocooners, well, this group of Canadians are busy taking their children to dance lessons and hockey games. If children are not a part of their life, involvement in career development or pursuing their latest personal interest occupies their time. Cocooners are indifferent to multi-faith issues, unless an excessive number of visible minority people seem to be moving into their neighborhoods. Collaborators, on the other hand, strive to affirm their own convictions while accepting the convictions of others. Collaborators seek to build bridges. Without reticence, they engage others about what they believe, but they do so with regard for what is important to others. Collaborators are people who commit to be intentionally influential, but they do it with regard and respect for what other people treasure and believe. While collaborators resist the idea that all religions are equally valid, they are ready to make room in society for other religions and their practice. Now, if you have not already lost your way, we have talked about secularism and relativism and ideological pluralism. We have said they are enemies. We have laid hands, in a sense, on cultural pluralism as a positive reality for us in this modern world. And we are saying, in response to multi-faith pluralism or religious pluralism, that we need to appreciate what is true but discriminate in terms of what is outside the circle of truth. But there is one other expression of pluralism that is particularly reflective of Protestants. It's what we would call Christian pluralism. It is diversification of the Christian faith. It came to us historically through the Catholic Christian tradition, the Orthodox tradition, and then the Reformation and Protestantism arrived. Is it not healthy for us to look at the range of denominations within Protestantism in particular and to say that Protestantism is an expression of pluralism? It is different people believing in different things, but embracing the same Lord, the same Creator. Rather than thinking structurally and denominationally, it might be helpful for us to think about various streams of Christian spirituality. We could talk about the contemplative which addresses a longing for a deeper and more vital Christian experience with an emphasis on prayer, or the holiness tradition, or the social justice tradition, or the evangelical tradition, the charismatic tradition, the charismatic power orientation, or the sacramental. Because I've been asked to speak and the microphone is mine, I may as well tell you what I believe. To look at this in two ways is to say each organizational expression of religion, or each denomination, would in fact probably gravitate to one or two or perhaps three of these spiritual orientations and emphases. But as I understand the family of God, if we think about the reign of God in modern life, ladies and gentlemen, these expressions of Christian spirituality are all Christian. And as they express themselves within the life of organized faith, they give to us another expression of the diversity of God. Now, because you've been so patient through this heavy sledding, what I would like you to do is to look at this breakdown of what we call streams of Christian spirituality. And I'd like you to reflect on your own primary pull. Which expression of faith would mark your life? And if you're not ready to be personal as you think about this particular issue, which are the main markers for the Baptist Church or for the denomination that you represent this evening? Can I invite you just to look and reflect, identify what is primary for you or for your church, and to turn to the person next to you and say, this is where I find my place in the family of God. I give you a few moments.